Well, hello, everybody. My name is Brian Kilcourse, and I'm one of the managing partners at RSR Research. I happen to live out in California in the United States. And the purpose of this discussion is to compare notes. We named this Two People Separated by a Common Language based on a quote I saw in a Patrick O'Brien book many, many years ago, and having to do with a captured British captain living in Boston. And anyway, we hope this isn't a capture. But a lot has been going on in our marketplaces that affect each other. And of course, there's the technology underpinnings that we're all interested in. So this is really a free-form discussion just to talk about some of those things. We hope you find it interesting. Um, you don't need to hear too much more from me. Let's just go around the table. Neil, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what do you want to
Sure.
talk about today?
Up until recently, I was a senior advisor to the Department of Business and Trade, which is a UK government organisation. My sector was retail and luxury consumer goods. Retired from there last year, and now for my sins, I'm doing pretty similar job, working with major retailers here, expanding them overseas, but independently now. So I'm no longer tied to government policy. I can do what the clients want rather than what the government wants me to do. So yeah, it's
You're
a little bit different
liberated.
out here.
It's a big
You're
difference.
liberated.
It to a certain extent it's a little bit like freedom, but I mean, look, the British government has a great retail department. There's a great service in the Department of Business and Trade with teams in embassies all over the world, same as the US does. With their embassies, they give a lot of help to retailers. But of course,
Yeah.
budget cuts over the last couple of years have devastated the service. I mean, I just heard today that our office in Dusseldorf is closing. When I first joined, I think we have 5 offices in Germany. We're now down to Berlin, and that's your lot for the whole country. It will affect trade. Of course, it has to affect trade, has to affect business. The more you cut, the less feet you have on the ground, the harder it's going to be for us to really support companies, which I suppose is good for me in a way, because now as a freelancer, a lot more clients are coming to me and saying, can you give me the help the government used to give me but can no longer do?
Mm.
Boy, abandoning Dusseldorf, that's one of the retail centers on the planet.
Oh,
If you
well,
want to find out
exactly.
what's going on in retail, Dusseldorf is one of the 5 or 6 cities you have to visit. Uh,
Exactly. We've had a very good team there for a long time, and I was surprised at that one to go.
yeah,
There's some other offices, yeah, I expect us to close, but Dusseldorf, no.
no, you might as well close New York. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
seriously, or London. These are important towns to understand if you can.
Well, last time I was in New York, we couldn't afford a receptionist, so you had to sort of either know who you were going to see or just wait in the door for a long time, hoping that someone would let you in.
Oh, that's too
So
much.
Steve and I are both recovering Bostonians, and we were trained at birth not to say nice things about New York, so we will
Right.
refrain right now. So,
Now, come on. I used to live in New York many years ago. I loved it when I lived over there. I
I
took a
have to
trip over
admit
there
I did
last
too.
year. Also, had a fab time. Love the place. Yeah. Okay, it's
it's
a very much an acquired taste, but
it is an acquired taste. Well, Maya, you're a world traveler. Talk a little bit about what you do and what's on your mind.
Thanks, Brian. Good to see you guys and be
Yeah.
able to have this catch up again. Yeah, I've been at this now for about 27 years through the route of being a journalist and an editor, and then a researcher analyst, and latterly a publisher and an author. Written a couple of books about Amazon, two editions of a book about Amazon, co-authored of that. Good news on that one, little update, 19 languages now, just come out in Arabic, which is
Wow.
fun.
oh
Okay.
wow, good stuff.
Okay.
Congrats.
Yeah, and then other people know me for omni-channel retail. It's funny, I'm just consulting on appearing at an event towards the end of this year called Unified Commerce, the new word to unified commerce. I don't know if we're going to come to that. It's all semantics as far as I'm concerned, but I am seen as the poster child for omni-channel retail. And other little update on that front, knee deep in writing a book right now. It's going to be called The Future of Shopping, using data, digital and AI to win with customers. It's meant to kind of appeal to retailers in that sense. I mean, it's got, you want to make it say what it do what it says on the tin, if you know what I mean, for retailers. So that's going to keep me busy the next few months, but just super, super busy helping retailers speak the language of technology providers, and technology providers to speak the language of retailers.
That is the name of the game, isn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
So through Retail Technology Magazine, which I said I own and publish, been busy doing that. Final thing, if we come to it, I'm sure we will. Hot off the press, I'm about to launch a new magazine. And it's going to focus on AI. So it's going to be more of a horizontal magazine than a vertical industry magazine, but it definitely sits at the intersection because, as far as I'm concerned, consumer-facing businesses, brands and retailers and all the ancillary sectors around them, travel, leisure, hospitality, they are kind of pushing forward really fast on AI, faster than a lot of other businesses. Because let's face it, pharma, healthcare, they're all hugely, financial services, they're all so much more regulated than retail. And maybe we'll talk about the FTC case against Amazon that's just going on. I had the FT
What is
interview me
going
about
on
that.
there?
Yeah, well, I had the FT interview me about that on last Monday, and I've just come back from NRF Europe as well, which is an interesting one that we might want to talk about. Why the NRF is
I was on the last
porting
call we were just
itself.
on. I was asking someone to tell me about that, so I'd be very interested on your take on that,
Mhm.
Yeah. So busy times, but yeah, happy to try and unpick some of those things, but all very topical, hopefully. And Steve, what have you been busy doing?
Yeah, no, every time we talk, I feel like the only thing that really separates us is the ocean. We have such similar backgrounds. I started in journalism. I've been an analyst now for 20 years, which didn't even occur to me until I just said it. It's been 20 years that I've been an analyst.
Had to put up
And
with me for
18 of
20
them,
years. Think of that.
yeah, how about it?
Yeah.
18 of them have been at our current company. So Brian and I work together in our little company called RSR Research. We're pretty different, we think. We like to think than the typical US-based research firms, in that we don't compare vendors. We never do this one's higher on a quadrant than this one. When we started this company as former retailers, all of us 18 years ago this summer, the reason that we started the company is we thought there's plenty of competitive intelligence out there. There's not a lot of market intelligence. So we set about trying to provide that. And usually about 10 times a year, Brian and I and our other partner, Paula, will go out and we will conduct studies of where we survey retailers. They're topic specific. Every year we do a store study. Every year we do a merchandising study, and on down the list, and find out what are the things that retailers are challenged by. What are the opportunities that they perceive within those areas of conversation? And probably just as importantly as anything else, what are they budgeting for from a technology point of view? What do they believe is going to help them get out of the predicament that they're in that particular topic? That's one half of our business. The other half is what we do with all of those findings. We make the findings free to the entire industry. So if you're ever interested in what's going on in the US in loss prevention or AI or supply chain, you can come on our website and find 20 years worth of data that will show you exactly what's happening in that topic. But the other side of it is, of course, all the consultative work that we do with technologists to do what Maya talked about, to help the technologists line up their conversation, their messaging with the retailers. Because retailers, despite the fact that they are very similar in a lot of ways to other industries, they're pretty convinced that they're not. And they need to be spoken to and messaged to in a very different way. And it's led for some really, I mean, like I said, we've been doing this for 18 years. It's led to some really interesting engagements. We love what we do. And we hopefully provide what we like to refer to as the objective voice in retail. We're not a pay-to-play voice. When we're talking about something, we don't have a dog in that fight. We're saying it because we, one, believe it in our bones, and two, we've been backed up with it by data.
Well, these things, there's a junction in the road that we're all talking about. It has to do with the importance of data and the importance of becoming much more responsive to what the data is saying to you than we ever were before. And that brings up AI, and it brings up supply chain, it brings up demand forecasting, brings up everything. I was going to start off our little conversation by talking about a report that we did very recently, which we've dubbed the Chaos Report. And the Chaos Report was a simple set of questions we asked, and it was strictly for the US. So we didn't reach into Canada or Western Europe or the UK, but it was basically, how are you dealing with tariffs? That was the question. And as you might imagine, the answer, generally speaking, is not very well. And but one of the things that comes from this is that retailers' natural response to stresses in the environment, either in supply or demand side, is to start scaling back, to hold back on labor, to hold back on technology investments, to hold back on growth strategies. And in fact, what we're finding, however, as it relates to technology investments, retailers are generally telling us that they feel the need to accelerate key investments in technology that's driven by AI. Now, primarily for demand forecasting and localization strategies and in the supply chain, but it extends into the customer interaction and the employee experience and all the rest of it. And this is moving very quickly. And I've used a phrase for a long time that frankly just doesn't resonate with retailers at all, but it's accurate, at least semantically. As we were saying, they're moving from a plan and execute model to a sense and respond model, much, much more along those lines. Which a manufacturing company would understand what that means, but a retailer typically doesn't. Um, so we're seeing a lot of interest in some of the things you were just chatting about, Maya, of using AI to be able to consume all kinds of non-transactional data to understand what's happening either on the supply side of the business or what's happening on the demand side. The question I'd have for you over there is, are you seeing the same urgency? Are you getting the same sense of urgency from retailers?
Sorry for the silence, just unmuting myself. Neil, I mean, I don't know. We've got to take a. You covered so much in that primer, Brian. You went from tariffs to the response, taking us from the macro to the micro and the
Yeah.
operational. I think it's tough over here, right, Neil? It's really tough at the moment. There's not much wiggle room for the government to be able to help. We can talk about macro issues like business rates and increased cost of labor. Labor allocation is, becoming even more important. So, I suppose that's to build on what you're mentioning there, Brian, about demand forecasting.
Yeah.
There is, yeah, there is a huge question mark over how much can I automate, and how much is that going to save me? And don't cut too far, don't cut to the bone too quickly. And
Mhm.
AI has a huge amount to do with that. I think that the sense and respond thing is funny because we were talking about that in Planet Retail back in sort of 2015, having a track and
Mhm.
trace supply chain and a sense and respond network,
I remember.
distribution network, and stores. So I think in that regard, maybe the technology has been the rubber coming up. Well, the road has come up to meet the rubber of those kinds of technologies. What I'm seeing on the ground, though, is yeah, you're right. In the areas of AI investment, it's accelerating hugely quickly. Are mostly back office, all shiny new front office things, but by scale and by volume, the big four supermarkets are really good bellwethers, and we're finally seeing ESLs. So to your point, you put the back office stuff in, but you've got to join up the touch points in order to be able to execute on the responsiveness. AI is, we're moving in from that predictive to that prescriptive phase, where if we are really truly going to embrace automation, we're going to have to let the machines act on the insights and the recommendations, and the predictions that they're giving us. So those kinds of projects are capital intensive and just super expensive. But I think my final point about that would be that I've also been saying for a long time that UK retailers, particularly, I think it's fair to say that US retailers as well, have been overstalled and underperforming through the whole balloon phase of growth of e-commerce over the last 25 years. And with e-com maturing and slightly flatlining after COVID, where you're never going to see that kind of double-digit growth again unless you're talking about teeny weeny bases like social commerce.
Mm.
we're shaking out to a slightly more mature understanding of the interplay with the channels, and finally the focus is pushing back, moving back to the store. Finally, it's being pushed that way because both of labour and also the expectations that customers have coming into the store, where when you think about a supermarket, we do all the work and then they make their margin. so you know, over to you, Neil. I don't know what you would agree with that or build on that. You know, fashion retail's finding it difficult. We haven't even talked about tariffs kicking in, and I think actually they've managed to delay a lot of that pain till next year, and we're going to see some really intense headwinds strengthen next year because of the global geopolitical
Well, yeah, when we talk
situation.
about fashion, yeah, certainly, because of course, how many months the product is on the water. We could talk about that just by itself, but grocery is a very different business, is different.
Right, Brian, you started this by talking about the sort of tech revolution. Are retailers are they desperate to get into it? Are they being forced into it? My view is that in general, they're being forced into it. Look at the perfect storm we've got on costs at the moment, here in the UK in particular. The social security taxes, the Brexit labour shortages, higher minimum wages, increased tariffs, inflation, which is still running hot, probably the highest of any developed nation at the moment over here. A retailer, if he's going to stay profitable, has to adopt AI, has to adopt all the tech resources he's got at his disposal. There is no choice in it.
You know, we've written for some years now that the value, we talk about it in the context of localization, essentially moving away from standardized assortments, standardized promos, standardized pricing to something that's much more locally sensitive. There's a big challenge with that, of course, and the organizational challenge is that you've moved from maybe hundreds of thousands of individual store SKU decisions to literally millions. You mentioned ESLs, Maya, you know, electronic shelf labels. That's one of the reasons why I think it'll probably eventually make it even over to the United States, because they want to be able to adjust their strategy on a per product allocation basis um, as often as they need to, as often as the situation demands it, and that's driven not just by supply but also by demand, and that varies. You know, it varies wildly now by micro markets. So, the retailers used to deal with that in the old days by having a smart merchant in the store, but those days are long gone. And what the next generation retailer did is said, no, is we're going to just standardize the assortment, and you're going to buy what we're selling you. And what threw that into a tailspin, of course, was the iPhone in 2007, followed by the Great Recession in 2008. Now here we are many years later, and finally, I think Maya, I think you just said it. I think the technology is up to the challenge. It wasn't that we didn't have these ideas before. We talked about sense and respond back, 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, we weren't there. The technology wasn't there. It certainly is there now. We just got off a telephone conversation with one of our clients, and we were talking about acceptance of public versus private cloud. And quite frankly, we're not hearing any resistance to this issue, where 5 years ago it was a death struggle. You know, the retailers, if they thought it was important, they wanted to own it. And they didn't want anybody else to ever get into their data. Now, with the assurances that companies have that their data is going to be protected, all of those points of resistance seem to have melted away. Is that what you're seeing over there on your side?
Neil, do you want to jump in on this one?
I'm going to let you start it off, actually, Maya. But yeah,
No
'cause I think
worries.
you're
Come on,
better
you can do
positioned.
it.
Okay, so yeah, I love the fact that you drew on exactly the thinking I had, which was, back in the 80s, again, thinking about grocery because it's 40% of everything we buy, right? It's the biggest sector. We have the retailers we have today through grocery and general merchandise, these behemoths, because they found the only way to make money was to consolidate and to rationalize and to make group buying decisions. And now we've almost come full circle and flipped that switch in terms of to the point of localization. When it comes to security, privacy, public versus private cloud, large learning models, do I let my employees use ChatGPT, all of these kind of guardrail ethics questions, I believe you're absolutely right. In the race to being forced into doing this, I think there aren't enough retailers that are thinking about that. But at the same time, you know, I remember when SaaS was becoming popular and you had often had CIOs who were wary, the ones that I ended up interviewing as case studies or win stories would say to me, these guys are expert at doing what they do. They maintain that. It's up to them to secure it. The only slight caveat I would put to that, let's say 10 years later, after having had those early conversations, is we have had a couple of big data breaches in the UK with retailers. I think that and I've done a lot of interviews about that. And you know, retailers are a much more attractive, lucrative target than they used to be. The more digital they embrace, the greater the surface vectors are for attack. So they can't go hell for leather headlong into this without thinking through some of those implications, which I think is absolutely key. But I hope, and I'll hand over to Neil on this, but I hope when we talk about public versus private cloud, AI, ESLs, that we talk not just about the technology that they want to use, but maybe a question for you guys, a question for Steve from your chaos report. What came out in terms of the challenges? What are the barriers to adoption? Because what I'm seeing is data. It's everything everywhere all at once, but you know, getting it into a warehouse or a customer data platform and then increasing your surface vector for attack even more by putting all your eggs in one basket is also a calculated risk. And then it's what do you do with it? What best practices are emerging, particularly in AI? I think we're a lot closer in understanding that innately with public versus private cloud. But all of these emerging, they're not even emerging, but all of these bleeding edge technologies nowadays, they do have implications from a risk perspective, especially now that they know so much about us in terms of collecting that data to be able to serve us better and run their business better, which is what you hope they're doing with it.
Well, there's two questions, one for Neil and one for Steve. Steve, I think one was directed toward you about what are we seeing in the chaos report as it relates to the obstacles to moving ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the chaos report was aptly named. We had that sort of as a working internal title going in the background when we were running the survey, but what we wanted to know, and you know, as you might imagine, there's varying findings based on segment, right? Grocers have a different set of issues than fashion retailers and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to get too deep into it here. But at the time that we conducted it, so obviously the Liberation Day came in April. We gave it a couple of weeks to set in and then conducted our survey, and we made it available in July, I believe. And at that time, the big question was, what's in play and what's not? And we thought that by the time that the report came out, we would have the dust settled there. And we still don't. You know, we're here knocking on the door of October, and we still don't know what's in play and what's not. What product segments? What countries are involved? What's a tariff going to be? Is it going to be that way for a week and then there's some sort of closed door deal and all of a sudden it reverts? So the real thing that we found is, yes, to your point, Maya, they have real concerns about their data, but that's pervasive. That goes across whether we're talking about supply chain or whether we're talking about merchandising. The fact that retailers are being shouted at by the tech community about AI can help you plan better, and AI can help you, you know, have a smarter workforce, and AI can help you reduce your labor. They're being told all these things. The more they dig into it, the more they realize their data is going to be the problem to enabling any of these things because they can't trust a lot of what they've collected so far. But as it relates specifically to the tariff issue, it becomes much more a question of, do we just plow through? Do we just have to ignore the fluctuations that are going to happen here and revert to what we're doing best? And that seems to be the adopted stance of a lot of retailers, particularly the larger. The larger they are, the more they say, we think there's going to be deals made to help us. We think that we're going to be able to plow through this better. And we think that we'll be able to survive, you know, longer. The big finding from that report is when you aggregated everyone together, the biggest retailers and the smallest retailers, and asked them, how long can you really endure a marketplace of this level of volatility? The answer was 6 to 9 months. And that's not a long time,
That's
right?
not long.
So
That's not
the
long.
larger retailers said, yeah, maybe we can hang on for a year or two. The smaller retailers said, we can't take this for 3 to 6 months. But when you combine it all together, that's a big takeaway number. What's happened since then, I believe, and Brian, you could probably confirm this better than I could, in a lot of the conversations that we're having off book with people, the strategy has been we've taken our lumps, we either bought a lot of inventory in advance, knowing that something was coming down the pike, or we didn't buy enough inventory and now we're in a real, we're in a really stuck spot and we're trying to scramble to catch up for it. But either way, we can't really plan for the unplannable. So we have to just put our heads down and control what we can control and let the chips fall where they may around us. Brian, does that sort of validate what you've seen?
Yeah, that's why one of our recommendations is don't slow down on your investments in next generation analytics. Not only are they just as important as they were a year ago, they're probably more important because you have to be able to sense a shift. And you can't wait for the next financial period reports to come out before you've detected that that shift has happened. Neil, one of the things I wanted to direct in your way was this whole issue of we're talking about levels of localization and agility that we never saw before, and it's data driven. One of the things I suspect that you and I are both from the same generation of retailer that achieved what we achieved by essentially standardization, optimization of assortment and those things, and then buying as big as we possibly could, because that was the way we lowered the unit cost of goods. That's how you did it. And so if we could buy a truckload, we'd buy a truckload. The levels of localization,
Sadly, those days are long since passed. Yeah.
they have passed. The question that I thought you might be able to help us understand was how do retailers make money if they can't push back on the cost of goods? What are they going to do? Consumers are still extremely sensitive about price for all the right reasons. And
Yeah.
there's, I would characterize as a baseline sales and administrative costs that they're going to undertake no matter what they do. If you open a store, you're going to have generally this ratio of expenses to revenue. So how do you make money if you're already only making a few cents on the dollar or a pound to bring down to the bottom line? How do you continue? How do you play on?
Yeah, you're right. I'm sort of pretty old-fashioned retailer in my viewpoints and things. The days when we used to be able to buy big bulk and things, put it into the stores, and hey, a pair of blue jeans is going to sell as a pair of the day tomorrow, the day afterwards, or whatever. It's going to carry on. It doesn't work like that anymore. And there's no point in even sort of thinking that you can go back to those. But one of the things that Steve said earlier on was about timing. This 6 to 9 month window, of change. I think 6 to 9 months is. I mean, it's not really viable because during that 6 to 9 months, everything is changing so fast now that the situation. So you've got the same issues now, but new versions of the same issues. So whether it's data, whether it's stock control, whether it's your AI issues, which is also advancing very quickly, the amount of change that we're experiencing in our industry today in 1 month or in 3 months, it's the same as 3 years used to be.
Sure.
So there's constant change. So you come back to the original question, how do you actually make money in this? Now, first of all, if I knew the absolute answer to that, I'd be a very rich man. I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I'd be probably on a beach somewhere, or with my
Everything would be
Bentley parked
gold.
outside.
I like that idea.
Everything will be absolutely wonderful in that. But
Yeah.
look, we all need to make money out of the industry, but we've also all got to stay very much up to date with cutting costs, with keeping our costs as low as possible. AI is obviously helping us do that. The downside about AI is that long term, the fear is it's going to put everybody out of a job. So if everybody's out of a job, how are they going to be able to afford to come out and buy the products that we want to sell them? Is that going to actually work then? Well, we've survived other issues. The Industrial Revolution of 200 years ago told everybody that by bringing out machines, everybody's going to be out of work. Nobody will have anything to do. So we're all going to go bust and we're all going to end up as peasants back in the fields again. It didn't happen. So I'm quite sure we're going to find solutions to the current problem. It's just not there yet. We're not quite aware of exactly how we're going to do it. And I think, the smart guy is the guy that's still thinking not 9 months or a year ahead, but 3 months ahead, and knowing exactly, or being flexible enough to change whatever they're doing as the situation changes, not waiting those 9 months, not forecasting a year ahead. I used to do a lot of business with Marks and Spencers. In those days, Marks and Spencers literally forecast 2 years ahead. They knew exactly what they were buying. They'd place their orders, they'd place these huge orders, and they'd take in the goods. You can't do that now. You can't buy that far ahead. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to move with the times. You've got to be able to adjust your buying, your stock control, your supply chain to fit the market as it is. Otherwise, you're going to have vast amounts of empty stock that you're going to have to find somewhere to dump. And you can't dump
It's funny you
that
say
stock
that,
anymore
Neil.
in the international market, which again used to be a solution. Whatever you got left over, let's ship it out to India, Indonesia, wherever it happens to be. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Those markets are just as up to date as we are. They want the same fashions that we want. They want the same products that we want. And their retailers, when I travel around the world and I see some of their retailers, they're more technologically advanced than a lot of our retailers are. So, how do you solve this situation? Localization, yes, is one of the things. You've got a short-termism. You've got to bring things back to the country. I mean, this is in a way what Mr. Trump is doing in the States, saying bring everything back to the States. Our supply chain then, or our supply term is going to be 3 months rather than 9 months. Rather than buying goods out of China. Is this realistic? Is it flexible? Is it capable of doing it? Is it going to put our prices up and our inflation up to a level that nobody can afford it anymore? You're asking me a question to answer. I'm actually asking you more questions than I'm answering.
Right. No. But they're valid questions. I mean, one of
They
the
are
things we
good
pointed to
questions.
in the chaos report is when you talk about this country manufacturing, there's 400,000 unaccounted for manufacturing jobs open right now in this country that no one wants to work. So the idea of bringing
Yeah.
manufacturing back to this country is something. It's funny what you're talking about the timeline, though, Neil. I was with a technologist last week. They were not a client, so therefore we were there sort of as a, see if we could offer some bits of advice. And one of the first things they said to me is they're selling workforce management, right? And they're leaning heavily on the AI component. When Brian and I are talking to people in the AI space when it comes to the workforce, they tend to fall into one of two camps. We're either going to give you a technology that makes you as a frontline worker empowered, right? We're going to make you smarter and more knowledgeable and more valuable, and therefore someone that, when a consumer walks in the store, they want to interact with you rather than just their own smartphone because you add value. Or we're going to go the direct opposite way, which is we're going to give you AI and turn you completely into a bot. Go to aisle 7, replace the toothpaste, and tell me the second you've done it, right? Those are the two camps. And so I didn't really know which camp these guys fell into. And the first thing that their chief of sales told me is he said, every time that I go out and talk to a retailer, the very first thing that I tell them is that 3 months from now, every part of this conversation is going to be obsolete. Everything I'm saying to you 3 months from now will be completely and totally replaced by something
Exactly.
else. And I said to him, well, that's one hell of an opening pitch. How then do you sell anything? And he said, well, because I show empathy to them because it's a horrible time to work in retail. If you're a frontline retail worker, and Brian and I have seen this in some of the conversations we've had with college professors who've actually studied what is the life of a jobber right now. They're underpaid, they're underappreciated, they're there for only a couple of months at best. Most times, and this was one that was kind of news to me, they can't even afford to live in the environment where they're working. So they have quite a commute just to get to the
Yeah.
place where they're actually working. I mean, I knew doctors and nurses and lawyers, or not doctors and nurses and lawyers, doctors and nurses and teachers couldn't live in the communities they serve. But I didn't know retail workers couldn't afford to live in the communities they serve. So his whole thing is, we're going to try to give people technology that makes their life suck a little bit less. When an angry consumer comes in off the street, they can't find what they're looking for, or the pre-investigative work that they did before they walked in the store was different to what they're finding, and so on and so forth, that the associate actually has a fighting chance of being valuable and not just somebody who's getting the snot kicked out of them for $14 an hour or whatever the equivalent is. And I thought, well, that's a place to start. It's a good place to start, right?
Yeah.
But now you add in everything that you talked about, Neil. Labor shortages, rising prices, a consumer base that isn't particularly pleased with not just the price of eggs now, but the price of eggs and beef and poultry and. It's a very difficult time. So Brian, your question, how do you make money during that? I don't know.
Well, we know it.
You're in the same boat. You know, if you knew the
Yeah.
answer to that, you'd be driving a Rolls Royce, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I hope you guys don't mind me jumping in there because I've heard you all sort of make your points, and I was thinking and going, well, do you know what? If I was running a retailer now, there are some things that I'd say. I would call it a 3-point plan.
Okay.
With AI, particularly we're talking about demand forecasting, supply chain, moving from predictive to prescriptive. A supply chain vendor said to me, a product VP of product said to me, the traditional historical time series database models that let retailers down so badly during COVID, they were two-dimensional, you know, if that then this. By bringing in a lot of other bigger data sources, you can start to create battle plans.
Right.
He made a really good example. He said, you know what, in the Pentagon, there's a battle plan for Sweden. It's probably got dust on it. You'd have to pick it up off the shelf, and you know what I mean? But it's there. And I think that
It involves volleyball teams somehow.
yes, exactly. But I think the fact is retailers are starting to say, what if? What if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? If I change this variable, what if this happens? So you're starting to build up a whole. So what happens if stores shut again? What happens if you know, I can't get my goods across the channel. I can't get my goods across the Atlantic. They can ask these big what if questions of them. And I think battle planning is going to have to be absolutely key. You can never predict everything, but you can broadly, on the kind of perma-crises we've had to deal with, start to model the types of impacts that are going to really have an effect on your business. And I think that's going to be absolutely vital when you're thinking about tariffs. I think we are much more squeezed in the UK than you guys are in the States right now. I think you guys have pushed a lot. We have a huge amount of fiscal drag coming through our economy at the moment. Public sector's taking 2% of GDP. We would have a 3% GDP output for this year, but it's only going to be 1%. So,
well, to clarify, Brian and I didn't do that.
No, I'd never blame
you guys are
for
responsible for this. Hang on.
No. I mean, in terms of the tariffs, we've seen the retailers insulate themselves against that by, as you say, buying in a clever way or not buying enough, and we've got this 6 to 9 month window of survival. But what I've seen retailers in the UK do is really go back to that point I said about being overstored and underperforming and rationalise their store network. So to Neil's point, and then to build on your point about localization, it's not just what customers want. They want to know that the retailer understands what they like. They like this type of Eccles cake in this region versus this, but they also are trying to rationalize the cost of goods sold from an online and in-store perspective by really looking at catchment areas, halo effects of online if they close and open stores. So you're not just seeing stores close, you are seeing some stores reopen, be opened or being refurbished, but I think they're becoming a lot more intelligent about that. And also, to your point, Neil, buying, ranging is a lot more customer driven. I mean, Tesco's is bringing retail media network data into buying discussions with suppliers nowadays. So, you know, if the customer doesn't want it, if it's been sat in this position in the shelf for this long, make me an offer. Do you know what I mean? So, there's a lot more.
The technological capabilities are amazing. They're astounding.
Yeah. And the final thing,
we're back to the principle
retention.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Neil. Oh, no, you go ahead. We're back to the principle of.
No, I interrupted you. Yeah, I was just going back to the principle of, you know, you don't need 100 stores anymore. You know, if you're a retailer, what you need is one store in a market. You don't, for example, Topshop used to have 4 stores, I think it was, in Oxford Street alone. You know, any retailer doesn't need that many stores anymore. You need one very good showroom store in any major town or whatever, but it's a showroom. You know, the rest of it for good social media marketing, so that people are going to come to you. They're going to come to that one store if they want to actually see and touch the merchandise, or they're going to go online and buy the products from you. You don't need all those retail stores anymore, unless you're in the food industry, of course. Supermarkets, people like to go out and do their little spontaneous buy.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah,
we could
Tom.
learn a lot from the States in that regard, in terms of the space race. You know, you guys are surplus for space in the States. So being as close to your consumer has never been quite that important. But I suppose it's made choosing locations a little bit less like just throwing darts at a dartboard. You have to be really a lot more precise. But the final point I was going to make out of my 3-step plan was retention. You know, we've got to move towards using the AI to not just chase the next cash
Yeah.
paying anonymous
Yeah.
promiscuous customer who buys at the lowest price and you'll never see them again. You've got to start identifying who your best customers are, because they are probably responsible for upwards of 60% of your sales. The Pareto rule, 40-60, that's what Clubcard
It's
found
the-
when it
Yeah.
had
We
it.
have and we have a lot of data that says those people are resentful that retailers don't know who they are, right? The people that are loyal to a brand that then turn around and say, why do you treat me the same way you treat everyone else? Don't you know I'm one of your best customers?
Yeah, exactly. You've hit it spot on. I think we're going to see some really interesting approaches to Black Friday, Cyber Monday in that regard. I mean, it's going to be Black Friday from the first of the month. Really, we're going to get the whole month of deals. But I think
Yeah.
AI,
Right.
you're going to see
What happened
AI
when
used much more. Sorry, go ahead, Neil.
No, all I was saying was that what happened when Black Friday was just a Friday. It was a one-day event kind of thing. Now it's a month-long event. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was
Yeah.
adding to what you were saying rather than interrupt.
You know,
No.
there's a lot that we brought up here. We're actually running out of time, but I was thinking about some of the things we can say for next time. Well, I just read a survey from the UK and said that hyper personalization is the big thing, AI driven, of course. We could talk about whether or not that's true or not. Maybe we'll save that for next time. But what we found in the States is, although that consumers' attitudes about the discovery process has really changed. They whether they buy in the store or buy online or however they get the merchandise, they've made their decision much earlier in the journey than they ever had before. And the way we describe this in reports is that people don't go to stores anymore to discover stuff. They go to stores to complete a purchase, and that's a different behavior. So the way we characterize that is we say that consumers don't see channels. They don't see a difference between the digital side and the physical side. That having been said, at least in the United States, the stores have been enjoying a kind of a resurgence. Not more stores, but let's call them better positioned stores.
Right.
And I've always been convinced that's because for the entire time that humans have been on the planet, we've gone to the marketplace for one reason or another. And so this is just the modern permutation of that. But yeah, it's definitely an overstored environment and it was built on the notion that people walk into a store to discover stuff, and that isn't what they do. They've investigated their potential purchases, and even if they're going to buy them in the store, they already know plenty about the product, and possibly even more than the employee, which gets to another thing you brought up, Maya, is that in a world where the consumer is so hyper informed, how do you keep employees? How do you do that? As it relates to being profitable, moving toward a sense and respond, Neil, you're spot on. That what's happening is that people are trying to respond very quickly to what's happening in the marketplace. In the days of buying big and forcing consumers to buy what it is that you've put on the shelf for them, those days are kind of over. But Maya, it relates back to something that you said, and that's that you have to your decision cycles have to be much, much, much faster than they ever were before. And forecasting once a quarter, which is what we used to do. I used to joke in my company that we'd usually finish our forecast about 3 weeks into the new quarter, and then we'd run at variance for the entire time. And you can't do that. That's just not realistic. And yet, when I tell that joke, most retailers, at least the ones that have as much gray hair as I do, say, "Yeah, that's what we did, all right." And the new world is driven by the ability for the business to have assets in position so that they can respond to a scenario, or as you call a battle plan, Maya. They'll have several of these battle plans. We used to call it scenario planning, right? And scenario planning used to be done manually. It was a horrible project that used to take forever, but you'd come up with a worst case, expected case, and best case, and you'd pick the one that you thought was going to happen, and then you plan to that one. Now it's much more fluid and it's much more in season as opposed to preseason. These plans are being adjusted in real time. So, for example, if you've held back some inventory to a store for a drop of a new fashion collection, and you realize that it's moving in one part of the country but not the other, you can adjust very quickly. Where in the old days, what we would do is we'd allocate that out to the stores and then we'd start marking down, right? That's what we used to do.
Yeah.
And retailers don't want to do that. And it goes back to what the customer wants. The customer doesn't want to slog through all that inventory that they don't care about. You know, they want to see what they want to see. So it's the interesting thing and fun thing for people like me anyway is this is all driven off of information. That's what makes this go. And information is being managed by amazing new technologies that help us to understand the implications very quickly and to act accordingly. Then we could talk about automation next time and how that plays into it. Because we still haven't answered the question, how do you make money in this world?
Well, a couple of comments that were made earlier on about, how do you keep your staff happy? How do you make, when you're paying them so badly in comparison with the marketplace? Is this really going to be a requirement for the future? Because the way, if you figure like in London at the moment, the train drivers just went on strike because they say we can't afford to live in London on a salary of 75,000 a year for driving a train. What does a train driver do? He pushes a lever forward, he pulls it backwards, he stops the train. He's responsible, for a few hundred people. That's why he says I've got to be, but he can't live on that. So how does a retail worker on 30,000 a year manage to survive in London? Well, they can't. So the only way a retailer can operate there is to cut the number of staff. Well, that's naturally happening anyway because the labor shortage is within it. And why the labor shortage? Not only Brexit, but the fact that people don't want to work in retail anymore because it's poorly paid. So you've got to cut down the number of staff. The only way then you can survive cutting down the staff is to effectively mechanize your entire operation. Put more AI in it, put more tech resources into it, so people still have a great experience in there, but they don't have somebody personally looking after them while they're in the store. Only in the luxury end do people still expect that. So think about cutting costs. Do you actually need to make your staff happy? You can make your staff happy by having half the number of them, but paying them 50% more.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I would say make sure you're selling something that people want. Basically,
yeah.
It starts with a desirable product.
Yeah, because
that's always been the magic key to this industry.
There's a lot of middle ground that's been squeezed in this industry. If you are high value, low volume, then you probably need to look from a customer experience perspective at really giving your customer what they want. Help me find what I'm looking for in the manner to which I want to, whether that's someone making me feel really special or self-service and convenience. And help me know it's right for me and help me buy it and give me the after sales that give me the confidence that it's the right purchase for me. If it's a high volume, low value business, then maybe what you're seeing is the retailer pushing more and more and more work to the consumer. But going back to Brian's original closing point, retailers were blown away during COVID that people that came in with appointments had done all their research online. They converted higher, a greater proportion, basket sizes were bigger. So actually embracing the digitally informed consumer, making sure that you show them, you know them, and you know what's right for them, and giving them the tools to interact, engage with you in that manner, it's got to be a winning recipe. And actually, in that regard, you can hopefully create a virtuous loop where the data drives better decisions that help you run your business better, that actually help you serve your customers better as well.
We're going to have to leave it there. I just have one piece of advice, and Neil, maybe you can pass it on to your friends in labor and government. If you're going to go on a general strike, transit workers, you need to do it like the way the French do it. Do it in August, because that's when all the American tourists are in town.
Oh no,
Yeah,
they
come on.
did it.
No,
They did it in Paris last week for NRF Europe. So there you
yeah.
go.
I mean,
For Paris, nobody is in Paris apart from the tourists during August. So, they're
I
Exactly.
not
know.
upsetting the
That's,
locals
They're all
that
in
way.
Greece.
I was going to tell you, I've sat at a table at a bistro in August in Paris trying to get service, and I might as well be trying to go to the moon. But but anyway,
Brilliant.
this has been a delightful conversation, and
Yes.
thank you guys for your generous allocation of time. Let's do this again soon. We have so much to
Yeah.
talk about. One of the things I was thinking we might want to talk about next time is the next generation workforce. Maya, you brought that up several times, and I know we're going to have some to say
Mm.
about it too. And Neil, you said something kind of provocative. Well, who says we need them? But I think we need to talk about this.
No,
Might be a good conversation.
it's provocative in the fact that do we actually need them on a permanent basis? Do we need them the way that they're being used today? Uh, no, I think a much higher quality, better trained workforce, smaller workforce, yes, and the technology to back them up is going to be more reliable than just
I
filling the
think
store
so.
with people that are wandering around and,
Agreed.
hey, may I help you, sir?
Agreed.
We're
Agreed.
about to
Yeah,
launch a study on that very subject, so we'll have some data next time. I will
Great.
prelude by saying there's a whole new generation of workforce that have vastly different expectations than their predecessors, and this will be well
yeah.
worth talking about. So we'll save it for next time. All right.